I've said many times in different streams that one of the few things that kept me still willing to try and talk to women for the purpose of cultivating a romantic relationship was the hope that one of these interactions would evolve into a marriage, which would be followed by starting a family. However, much like getting a date, this never materialized. I've made no secret of my disdain for the lack of thought modern parents put into having children, specifically the repeated pattern of accidental pregnancies when there are so many forms of birth control. I've noticed it occurred to me recently that I've never really explained what I would do if I was in their position. And I think it's important to offer a counterexample to the garbage that these people impose upon their children. It should be noted that I don't believe my solutions are foolproof, and there would be, no other issues that would complicate raising a child. We can't prevent what we can't predict, after all. But I still think it's important to try and do something more constructive than randomly popping out kids. So let's dive into this scenario and answer the question, what if I became a parent? I believe the role of a parent, especially while their child is underage, is to provide emotional and financial stability. I'll be defining what I mean. When I say emotional stability, I'm referring to my belief that a child should have both of their parents. This is why I never entertained the idea of having a kid with a woman I was not married to, because it's too shaky of a starting point to bring a life into the world. Of course, there are parents who are not married that make it work, but children born out of wedlock have higher chances of various non-desirable fates, which include higher incarceration rates, not graduating from either high school or college, etc. This is not about creating a foolproof system, but it is about creating the best opportunities for the child from the outset. I've said repeatedly that I think a person who wants to have a kid should strive to do it with someone that they are in a committed relationship with, ideally married to. I've had some modern clowns try to dismiss my views as old-fashioned without being able to explain to me what exactly is wrong with wanting to be in a committed, stable, ongoing relationship with someone before you have a kid with them. It is a fact that a man will have more girlfriends than he will have wives, so being married to a woman at the time you have a kid with her by design symbolizes the exclusivity of the relationship. I've mentioned before in some of my streams how we live in the twilight zone when it comes to what is now taboo and what is normalized. Imagine living in an era where putting a ring on someone's finger and creating a union that they can cancel at any time is harder than getting a woman to carry a child for 9 months that she didn't want in the first place. It should be much easier to get married than have a kid with someone, but it isn't. I can't name a single married woman that I know personally who isn't over the age of 40 and usually has been married multiple times. Now, the other thing that makes me very serious about marriage is because I've had firsthand experiences with a woman scorn, meaning I've seen multiple instances where they will put the father of their child who they're no longer with on child support as part of a revenge scheme. Women tend to be the custodial parent in the case of parents no longer being together, and some of them will get so upset over no longer being with the man, the disillusion of their romantic relationship, that they will use financial support as a way of turning their child into a tool to punish the man. And this ties back into wanting to get married because I've never heard of someone putting their husband on child support. I've said before that romantic relationships are extremely biased in favor of the women, with people telling men to approach them and do a whole host of things to appeal to women, who in turn have to do nothing to appeal to men besides exist. I've seen too many instances of men getting punished for having a kid, and I don't understand why I should have to participate in another system that is already geared against me by virtue of my gender, rather than the content of my character. A key part of emotional support is being able to accept your child for who they are. I think I'm accepting of most things, different orientations and religions, for example, but I'm not going to pretend that there are not certain things that would disgust me. If I had a son and he was a drug dealer, I'd be horrified. But many of the undesirable traits that a potential kid could have can be attributed to the influence of external factors. For example, I used to believe there was something wrong with being a certain age and not having a girlfriend. And this belief wasn't fostered in me by my grandparents or my parents, but rather by peers and classmates, an external factor, if you will. You do have bad people who come from a two-parent caring household, but that still wouldn't be something I would be discouraged by. There's a risk in everything we do. And I think abandoning an interest in wanting to start a family because the kid might turn out a certain way is ridiculous. I would try to offer advice and calmly explain why what they are doing is wrong and enact punishments such as curfews and taking away electronics in the event that they break the rules. I think a strict father can contribute to a child having a sense of right and wrong and knowing from an early age that there are consequences when they do something wrong. Now, when I say financial stability, I'm not talking about being rich. Just can any caricature you've concocted in your cerebrum, and allow me to elaborate. When parents who are committed to each other and the idea of having a kid together decide to plan out a birth, this entails saving up funds for the purpose of giving that child some financial stability before it's even born. I want to contrast this with one of the setbacks when you follow the model of accidental pregnancies that people seem increasingly fond of doing. Oftentimes, I hear these parents complain how expensive children are, a sentiment that I would agree with, but nonetheless, one that I think is mostly self-inflicted. No one makes someone have children, and a lot of times when they've created these kids from selfish acts of pleasure versus actually wanting a family, you get the results that we see. This is where we run into an area that I'm admittedly more jaded about the prospects of than I was back then. As I've made no secret of this to any of my stream viewers, I have been employed twice in the past 10 months, and the same saga repeated itself. The business prostituted itself as needing employees with now hiring signs. I was hired and given a bunch of lip service to make it appear as though I was impressing my employers. Just to be threatened with termination within my first few days to 2 weeks of being there, given a warning that I would be gotten rid of if I didn't improve the next time I came in, then seemingly kept after supposedly improving, just be fired after working a few more days. I repeat this depressing tale of the same thing happening twice to say that my view with regard to employers is something that I didn't have a year ago or 5 years ago. And if employers were as bad a few years ago as they are today, I have to admit that this would be a very difficult circumstance to mitigate. I also repeat this to let it be clear that I have no illusions about this alternate reality we're talking about, that even if I got part of what I wanted with regard to being a parent, there would still be obstacles that might prevent me from being able to take care of the kid. I would not try to start a family, however, without being employed somewhere for at least 6 months or longer. I have to be confident that this job isn't going to just get rid of me tomorrow or in a few weeks, which has been the case twice. One of the most ironic criticisms of me by my online rogues gallery is that I am negative or too negative. And it's very ridiculous because I am someone whose positivity is entirely based around the facts or experiences I have had relating to something. So while I don't believe I will ever meet a woman that likes me for who I am and would have done this with me based on the years-long same result that I received, I do think if certain conditions were met, it could have worked out. If I met a woman who was serious about wanting to start a family, who was committed to me and joined me in saving up for a child, if I'd been hired by somewhere that wasn't trying to fire me every couple of days or weeks and actually was willing to let me work full time, and if the woman worked full time as well, I believe this could have worked. But being a parent, in my opinion, should not just be about having a kid. It should be the pursuit of trying to make a better life for your offspring with a partner who has the same intentions. And it has to be done correctly or it's not worth doing at all. If I could only have a kid with the woman who I wasn't married to and thereby have a heightened chance of being put on child support by, I wouldn't bother. If I could only have a kid while I was destitute or unemployed, I wouldn't bother. Those two examples are not situations that are ideal for trying to foster another human life. Now let's explain why none of this will ever happen. I have this thing called basic pattern recognition skills, and this entails being able to infer something based on a discernible pattern. If I know that it took 5 years for a woman to be interested enough in me to want to go on a date, and I know that the majority of romantic relationships that someone has with others do not evolve into marriage, I can infer that it takes multiple years to get one date. Then the amount of time I would have to wait to meet someone that would be open to marrying me would be some measure of inhuman patience. So if you're getting one woman every 5 years, and you know most chicks don't go and marry the men that they go on dates with, the chances of you ever getting married start to look pretty slim. The only way this doesn't happen is if you believe in the lie of Triple L and think that there's going to be this magic year where a bunch of women start showing interest in you. It hasn't happened, and I have no reason to ever believe it will unless I become famous and have a bunch of gold diggers sniffing around. People always claim that not all women are the same. I've never personally made this claim, and it appears it's more of a catchphrase that's thrown around under assumption that I believe this as opposed to a retort that actually addresses my claims. I still maintain that, at least traditionally, leading up to the last 20 years or so, women were not all the same. I wouldn't exist today if my mother pretended to like my father, but just so happened to change her mind afterward, or asked him on a date and then rejected him when he accepted her proposal, or had some weird hours long sexual conversation just to be too short sighted that she couldn't even schedule another call. But I always say this: if women are so different from each other, wouldn't I have met at least one that was willing to do this with me? Wouldn't all of these different men that post on these different social media websites about how hard it is to get a date have met at least one that was willing to go on a date with them if they're truly different from each other? I've put a lot of thought into why the lady lacking logic bothered me as much as she did, and the conclusion I drew is that usually if I attempt to engage in a conversation with a woman about the romance topic, generally they just listen and don't really try to act antagonistic toward me. TV Tropes has a trope named distaff counterpart, which is the female version of a male. Triple L was basically a distaff counterpart to my online harassers. Like them, she had a problem with my love life, even though it had nothing to do with her, gave unsolicited advice, and tried to accuse me of botching it in some way with little to no critique of the women's role. The only difference between her and any other computer clown was her being someone I spoke to over the phone, and she wasn't as outwardly nasty as the rest of them. I know this is proven impossible for most people online to do, but put yourself in my position. You receive the same result every single time you approach a woman for 7 years. The sole variance being a gold digger who you only agreed to date after a month-long period of speaking when she didn't beg you for money. This leaves you with what you feel is a well-earned disposition. And with much consideration, you decide you're better off not talking to them anymore. A year later, you start talking to some woman who has never met you before, who wasn't around for any of that, who probably has never been rejected by a single man ever, and she decides to start spewing sewage by telling you there's this magic year where women not only stop rejecting you in excess, but also start approaching you. And it's easy to promise drivel when you've never experienced what I did. That woman never went year after year wondering if anyone would like her for who she was, or if it was just another cruel joke drudged up by an opportunistic gold digger. She never had to get harassed by online parasites who never met her, but claimed to be experts in her personality or what the opposite sex wants, in spite of never showing any proof that their expertise had yielded results for them. She never was told she was going to rape someone or blow up a building or some other random act of violence, according to online clowns who narrow-mindedly believe that every single person who isn't in a romantic relationship or wants to be in one is a mentally ill, homicidal individual waiting to exact revenge because they're not with someone. You know, that's what I find the most ironic about people like her. They never dealt with what it was like to live that nightmare on earth. I have earned my everlasting disposition with chicks. You have this term I really hate, the I word. I despise it to the point of not even wanting to say the word, but the definition is supposed to be men who consider themselves unable to attract a woman sexually despite desiring one and who are members of an online community. Now, I've never been affiliated with online communities, and yet I've had people try to associate me with this group because I criticize women. I've mentioned before that women critique men in general all the time on social media, and no one calls them femcells, the female equivalent of the word. They are allowed to be individuals with a right to be dissatisfied with their own love lives without being pigeonholed into a group. But when you're a man, you're not offered the same courtesy. I bring the I word up because many people like to accuse those that are unable to acquire the romantic interest of women of only wanting to be with them for sex in some new modern effort to both pretend that women do not like sex and to demonize men wanting intercourse as a vile desire. What I find so ironic about my placement in this group by online creeps is that the motive of wanting to have a long-term relationship with someone for the purpose of getting married and having children is so far removed from the one-night stand desire assigned by these people to any man that isn't able to get a woman to reciprocate their interest in them. Why is it so hard for people to accept that a normal man who wanted long-lasting normal things with women, such as being married and starting a family, had to contend with an era in which women talked to loads of men, and when it came to getting them to reciprocate his interest, he slipped through the cracks? Just to backtrack a bit, I want to also dismiss another line the opposition uses. Recently, I spoke to a woman about the romance saga, and I cited the time a woman agreed to marry me and then reneged a few days later as part of my continued disillusion with approaching. Instead of her focusing on the fact that a woman agreed to a union with me and then backed off quickly, she asked how old I was and then told me that I was too young to get married. I thought this was stupid, and I pointed out to her that you have people who have children while they themselves are underage. So I can't put a ring on a woman's finger at 19, but a teenage bimbo can hatch a seed just because someone inserted their dirty banana in her? She reminded me of these people who, for several years now, when they are trying to dismiss my points without actually addressing them, cite my age as a reason for me to not worry about such things. I've said before that posting content about romantic rejection on my part was done with the intent of having a nuanced conversation. And this obsession with age really shows that's never going to happen. I've always wondered if any of these people who are so quick to say, you're too young or you're young, have ever given any thought to my motives behind wanting certain things at a certain age. For all people online know, I could have wanted to start a family because my mother had cancer and I wanted her to see her grandkids before she died. But to consider that this young man who wants to do something may want to do it by a certain point due to the health circumstances of an older individual would require giving that man the benefit of the doubt and an acknowledgement that his motives may be more complex than what can be gathered from a surface level glance. You know, when I was 18, I wrote my first book. My grandfather, the only person who read its chapters when I was drafting it, put his hand on my shoulder and said that he was proud. You think if I waited to write a book at 40 or 50, he would have been able to do that? While I do hate that people have legitimized the prospect of a man having to wait multiple years just to go on a date with someone that has a vagina, what's most irritating about these blatant dismissals and condescending comments is that it is more of an example of people online believing that they know everything about someone they encountered online just from watching a video or speaking to them a few times. I hope this has been of some use to people that wanted specific explanations of the approach I would take if I was a parent. As mentioned before, nothing is infallible, but I believe the suggestions and plan of action laid out here would be more lucrative to a child than what many modern day parents do. I think the role of a parent is prepare their child for the harsh difficulties associated with living in contemporary society. And I think many people are disadvantaged by being the offspring of individuals who only made them because they were too lazy or too horny to wear some form of birth control. And I didn't make this video for the purpose of trying to sound like I'd be the best parent ever. As I admitted, there would not be a guarantee, but rather to point out the irony of people who don't want children having them, but then individuals such as myself who want to have them with a like-minded woman being overlooked.